lighting keeps changing. Hello everyone, it's your fairy godmother Mint, and welcome back to the Mint Coven. We are a little crooked right now because honestly my dog is asleep down there where I usually have the tripod, and I don't want to move her because she's comfortable, so this is what we're doing today. This video has been highly requested, and it's going to be a two-parter because I do have quite a few books, not like thousands, you know, but I have a good amount. Today we're going to talk about books on fairies. They're going to range from like folkloric stories to poems, to books that are made for kids, to books that are written by historians and people who work with the Fae as well. So we're going to have a really good array of books in this video. I do recommend, like I always say about everything, I went to do like this and not whatever that was. I do recommend reading everything you can about the Fae. Some fairy tales, like some like little children's fairy stories, you know, obviously they're not going to have that much information in them, but there are fairy tales and books about folklore that do have experiences from people, you know, real experiences that people have had, and so I think it's good to be able to get as much information as possible from lots of different avenues. Stories and legends are born from people's experiences a lot of the time, and especially when it comes to supernatural or otherworldly creatures and things like that, people's real life accounts will turn into stories because, you know, someone will hear someone's experience with something and say that will make a dope story, and then they'd write a story about it, although that was someone's real life experience, you know what I mean? So I definitely recommend reading just anything that you can, and I will talk about some stories, some fiction stories and novels that have really great information about the Fae that are not necessarily people's actual real life experiences, but still the people or the authors who wrote these stories did their research before they wrote the story, so they do have a lot of actual information that can help you along your quest, or just with learning about how some of the Fae act or how their hierarchy and systems run. So now that I've said all of that, let me show you some of my books. What I'm going to show you is Believing in Fairies. I've talked about this book on the channel before as one of my favorites. It's just a great book because it really gives you an idea of what it's like to believe in and experience fairies as an adult. It's called Believing in Fairies, a Manual for Grown-Ups by Marcia Zena Major, and it's a really nice book to read. It's one of those books that I go back to every once in a while when I just want to have that solidarity, I guess, with other adults who have experiences with fairies. Now my copy has some ketchup on it because Yule thought that he could paint with ketchup, but this is what it looks like, and it has some little illustrations inside as well, some little silhouettes, and it has people's real life accounts and stories of their experiences with fairies, and there are a lot of stories about people who have experiences in urban settings as well, which is always nice because, you know, not everyone's experience happens in a meadow, you know, somewhere. Some people are just getting off a subway and they're like having visions and stuff, so I find it really interesting, and I do highly recommend this book for sure. Another of my favorites, of course, is Good Fairies, Bad Fairies by Brian Froud. I love Brian Froud. I love his illustrations, and Wendy, of course, his wife. I love their illustrations. I love their personalities. I love all of the work that they've done. I think it's just fantastic. The books that they've written and illustrated are so interesting to read, and the illustrations to me have such a true essence of what the Fae look like and feel like for me, in my personal experience. When I think of the experiences that I've had, or I think of like the visuals I've had with the fairies that have shown me a face, if not their face, just a face, they look very similarly to the Froud fairies. There's so many really great little stories in this book, little bits of information about different types of fairies, especially when it comes to like herbal fairies or fairies that are kind of likened to plants and things of that nature. There are also some folkloric fairies in these books, just really beautifully illustrated to a point where you can get a good idea of what you would be looking at if you did have an experience with one of these fairies. and it's just really, really fun. It has such great information. Like, it's not really a book that's like about fairies, like a reference guide type of thing. It has it does have a reference feel, but more of like a whimsical reference feel, as if me as an old lady, like I'm sitting in my rocking chair, you know, smoking my pipe and telling my grandchildren, you know, stories about fairies, and adding in my little like funny stories and stuff, like, you know, in with the information. It kind of feels like that, you know what I mean? Like an old person telling you their experiences mixed with folklore, mixed with like whimsical personality traits. Like, that's how these read. But there is a good deal of information in here as well, so don't discount them as being like, you know, silly stories. Like, there's a great deal of information. The illustrations are just fantastic, you know, absolutely fantastic to me. Look at this. Like, look at this guy. Oakman and tree fairies. And then when you flip the book over to bad fairies, it gives you differences between the steely and unsteely fairies. Some that are considered, you know, creepy or scary or dangerous are on the other side, and it does give you some protection against fairies information and stuff like that. And as well as, like I said, fantastic illustrations. There's some creepies right there. Black Annis, the blue-faced hag. So yeah, just a really great book. Definitely recommend this one to anybody who loves to hear a creepy tale and to see beautiful illustrations to match faces with the creatures that you're reading about. Definitely, I recommend all Froud books. All Froud works, honestly. Get them all. And now for a little bit of a different feel, Brown Sugar Fairies, Saroja's Quest. This book is so sweet. This is definitely more of a children's story. It has beautiful illustrations, absolutely gorgeous illustrations, a very sweet story of a young girl whose family member becomes ill, and so she goes to their shop to help run the shop while they're sick, and she finds all of these beautiful curios and interesting little bits that she didn't know existed in this shop, and she meets a fairy there, and the fairy is being sent on a quest to find something very special to save her people, and the little girl wants to help her. So it's a really cute story. I definitely recommend this as a fairy story to read to your children. Read it yourself. Mine has some dust on it. If you don't know who the Brown Sugar Fairies are, I will link everything in the description box. This is the cover of the book. It's so pretty. The illustrations in here are absolutely gorgeous. Black fairy stories are very rare, and so when I found this, I snatched it up immediately, and I was not disappointed. It's such a sweet story. And like I said, the illustrations are gorgeous. The colors are rich and vibrant. And it's just a really, really nice story. Totally. And it has one of my favorite names. The little girl's name is Peppa, which is just one of my favorite names. I think it's such a cute name. Just look at how beautiful that is. I'm not going to give it away. I'm not going to flip any more pages. I'm just going to show you this, and that's it. Brown Sugar Fairies have a great Instagram where they share fairies of color from around the world. Lots of beautiful pictures of fairies that people send in, submit their own photos of themselves as fairies, and just really, really lovely. Whenever I find any fairy stories with people of color, I definitely grab that because, like I said, it's so very rare, and as a child growing up, I don't think I ever saw a black fairy in anything, you know, in any kind of media, movie, show, cartoon. I can't even remember. So, I mean, I was an 80s child, so things are a lot different now. There are definitely lots of stories with black fairies. Tinkerbell has a black fairy. That makes me happy, you know, the show. But still, we have a long way to go in seeing representation in all forms of media. So I definitely recommend grabbing this book if you can. There's also an oracle deck. They have an oracle deck with these fairies too, with fairies of color, and it's really, really cute. So I highly recommend this Brown Sugar Fairies, Saroja's Quest by Aisha Sinclair and illustrated by Joycelyn Furness. Please give them a follow on Instagram as well, because they post all kinds of information about the other books that they are writing and all of the other things that Brown Sugar Fairies offers. So highly recommend. Also, the Fairy Bible. This one I've spoken about a bunch of times. All of these Bible books, these like thick guides like this. There's like a crystal Bible, there's like a signs and symbols Bible, there's a Wicca Bible. These are all so great for information about anything. They're a great quick reference. I recommend them all, like all of these books. The Fairy Bible is super great. It's written by Teresa Moorey, and there are lots of illustrations in this one as well. It breaks it down from element to element. It goes through all of the elemental fairies. It talks about flower fairies, tree fairies, nymphs, dryads. It talks about the Fae as a whole, as an umbrella term, which is how I talk about them as well. So there's all sorts of information about different types of creatures that belong to the Fae realm. Really recommend this one, especially if you're just starting out getting into fairies. You're not thinking about working with them, or going into fairy Wicca or having a fairy faith specifically. This is just a great reference guide about the Fae in general information, great information. Highly recommend this book. A Complete Guide to Fairies and Magical Beings by Cassandra Eason. This one is also really nice. The cover of this one's really beautiful. This is a really good reference guide. This is also a really good beginner's guide as well. It gives you some information about things that you can do to draw fairies to you. It is another one of those guides that gives you information about the different types of fae in general. Again, as an umbrella term, there is information about gnomes in here. There's information about devas and elementals. It's a really good guide, and like I said before, I recommend reading all of these guides because there's going to be information in this one that's not going to be in this one, and vice versa. There's going to be information in every book that will help you to get a more broad perspective instead of just one person's perspective, or the perspective of this person and whoever else they referenced. People come from all around the world to learn about the Fae, and they ask people from all around the world as well, but not everyone's asking the same people, and always new discoveries. There are always new experiences to write about, so I definitely recommend checking out all the books. This one's a really nice classic one. I think this one was one that people were recommending this one a lot when I was doing like fairy studies back in my like 20s, my early 20s? Not my 20s. When did this book come out? In my 20s? Is this book that old? Am I that? Yes. Oh my god, 2002. So yeah, okay. In my 20s. This was one of the first books that we grabbed because I think it had just come out around that time. Yeah, I was 20. It had just come out. And so this was like an exciting one for everyone to grab. So this is one of the first ones that I read when I was doing fairy studies with other people in groups. So I definitely recommend this one as well. Another one that I love is The Healing Power of Faerie by Edain McCoy. It is wonderful because it is a book of healing. It's a book about healing, and if you are trying to work with the Fae in a healing capacity, if you're someone who is a healer and that is your path and you're working on healing yourself and other people and helping them to heal themselves, and you want to try that through the Fae, this is a great book. It has a really good amount of information on fairy shamanism as well. It has a great information on just really centering yourself into that world and understanding how to fit yourself into the world of the Fae and how to fit that world into your healing process. It's a beautiful book to read. I really enjoy reading it. It's kind of like, it's a very sweet book to read, if that makes sense. It talks about writing fairy melodies, writing songs for the Fae, healing songs that you can write that will help to facilitate your energy in a healing capacity. It has a really dope guided meditation in it as well, kind of leading you into your initiation as a fairy shaman. This is a really nice reference book when it comes to working with fairies for healing. I will say, however, you can't read this book and then think you're a fairy shaman. You know what I mean? And I do know that people do that sort of thing. Like, they'll read some books and go, okay, now I'm a fairy shaman, or something like, now I'm a shaman. Shamanism isn't something that you can just decide at the game. Just go, oh, I'm going to be a shaman, and then read 5 books and like, now I'm a shaman. You know what I mean? That is something that is fully sacred, that you really do need kind of guidance from people culturally to achieve. You can't just be a shaman. Becoming a shaman, if you're deciding to become a shaman, it's like becoming a doctor. You know what I mean? You can't just be like, I'm a doctor now, you know, I'm going to go work on someone. Like, you can't do that. You can't do that. You have to really have the spiritual presence, the understanding, and the guidance to become a shaman, honestly. It is a really good book. I do recommend it, especially if you're just learning about fairy healing. This one's great. Ted Andrews, The Enchantment of the Fairy Realm. This is also such, I mean, all of these are going to be great books, honestly. This is also a really good reference book, though. It has a lot of information about elementals, talks about devas, it talks about dragons, it talks about, and it gives you a lot. Also, something that I love about this book is that it gives you a lot of stories about different types of fae. A list of stories and tales that contain water fae. There's like lists of stories and tales that contain earth fae, so that you can go ahead and, you know, further educate yourself by reading all of those stories and tales as well. Especially if you're thinking that one type of fae are more in sync with you and what you do and who you are, and so you want to read more about them, this book gives you lists of stories about them, so it's super interesting. It does, like the others, give you some information about different types of fae individually. Like I said, it talks about dragons and stuff like that, but it also just gives you so much information for you to go out and get more information, you know what I mean? Like, it doesn't just say read this book and you're done. It says read this book and then read 50 other books about this other thing as well. So it's really good to give you like a continuing education type of thing. It gives you more information to look for and to search for, so that you can continue on your journey and kind of add more knowledge to your little knowledge basket. Another thing I love about this book is that it has exercises in it. I think this one does too. The Healing Power Fairy also has exercises in it. I love a book that gives you stuff to do. I love a book that gives you homework. I think that's really, really helpful, and it just really gives you more of a hands-on approach to learning. You're not just reading the book and then like trying to retain all the information. You're reading the book and then it gives you exercises, which whenever you have an exercise in a book like this, any kind of magic books, write down what you're doing in your Book of Shadows, because that is it's a spiritual practice, it's a ritual. Learning is a part of your ritual, so make sure you write those things down in your Book of Shadows. And anything that you do out of this book, write it down in your Book of Shadows. It's important to do that. But yeah, I do love this book for that reason as well, because the exercises are great. So it gives you like an exercise for sylphs, so it gives you an exercise for, you know, working with water fae, so that you have kind of an idea of what your body's going to be doing, or what your mind is going to be doing or should be doing when you're approaching this subject, which I love. And last but certainly not least, The Book of Little Folk, Fairy Stories and Poems from Around the World by Lauren Mills. I love this book. I love this book so much because when I talk about the Fae with people who don't know a lot about where stories about the Fae come from, they always assume that I'm talking about the She, the fairies of old that come from Ireland and Scotland. They never know that there are stories of the Fae in literally every part of the world. Can you imagine if there were only people in Idaho? No, we're everywhere. Just like everything else, it's everywhere. So this book has a lot of poems and stories about fairies from all over the world, and they're all very interesting. Some of them are just like fun little poems that people wrote, you know, referencing the Fae or referencing fairies or different types of fairy creatures. Some of them are legends and traditional stories from people's cultures, which is why I said before, read every book, because they will have different stories and tales that are actually written from people's cultures, people's legends, and it's really interesting to be able to read those and say, because you'll recognize some of the personality traits of the Fae in these books are also traits that people describe them having when they have an actual experience with them. So, you know. This book also has some classic stories like Thumbelina and Tom Thumb in it as well, but it also has some, like I said, some stories from different cultures, and so you'll be able to really get an idea of how the Fae are depicted in different places in the world. Some of these stories are origin stories for why things are the way they are in certain places, why people use certain symbols and certain types of music for certain things. These were not just, you know, fun little stories to tell your children at night. These are also stories about how things became the way that they are. There are so many different stories that originate from a fairy story. So Very interesting to read this book. I definitely recommend this book, especially for anyone who is unaware that there are fairy stories in all parts of the world. And I just love this cover so much. It's so cute. Look at their little faces. Look at his little cheeky face. Look at him. Look at him. These were just some of my favorites. I enjoy talking about fairy books so much. I enjoy talking about my favorite stories, and I really enjoy discovering new stories. So leave any kind of fairy stories that you have in the comment section below for all of us to look at. If you know of any other books about fairies of color, please send them my way. I would love to purchase them. I would love to support these authors that are creating multicultural stories for our children and our children's children to see, because it's incredibly important that everyone in the world knows that we are all different and beautiful and represented in the world as equals. Very important. So I hope you all are having a beautiful, magical day. School is starting for the children soon, so bless them. I hope they have a wonderful, wonderful school year. And I'm leaving. I'm peacing out. I'm hungry. I'm gonna eat. Make sure you drink some water today. And Mama Mint loves you. Mwah, mwah.